Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport truck, her boots hitting the dusty ground of Fort Harrison with a determined thud. The desert base stretched before her like a concrete maze under the scorching Arizona sun. At 23, she was one of the youngest officers to graduate from West Point that year, but her youthful appearance often worked against her in a world dominated by seasoned veterans. The base buzzed with activity as soldiers moved between buildings, their uniforms crisp despite the heat. Sarah adjusted her cap and straightened her shoulders, knowing that first impressions mattered more than anything in the military. She had worked too hard to get here, to let anyone think she didn't belong. "You must be the new lieutenant," came a gruff voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a stocky man in his 50s approaching. His uniform bore the silver eagle of a full colonel, and his weathered face showed decades of military service. Colonel Richard "Tank" Morrison had earned his nickname during the Gulf War, where he had commanded an armored division with ruthless efficiency. His reputation preceded him wherever he went. "Yes, sir. Lieutenant Martinez, reporting for duty," Sarah replied, snapping to attention and offering a sharp salute. Morrison's eyes narrowed as he looked her up and down, taking in every detail from her polished boots to her perfectly positioned name tape. His expression remained neutral, but something cold flickered behind his gray eyes. "So, you're the West Point wonder they sent us," he said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Another book-smart officer who thinks she knows everything about real soldiering." Sarah kept her expression steady, though she felt a knot forming in her stomach. "I'm here to learn and serve, sir." Morrison circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. Other soldiers in the area began to notice the interaction, some pausing their activities to watch. The colonel seemed to enjoy having an audience. "Learn, huh? Well, let me tell you something, Martinez. This isn't some classroom where you can raise your hand and ask for extra credit. This is the real army, where people's lives depend on split-second decisions and years of experience. You think 4 years at the academy prepared you for that? I believe the academy provided me with a solid foundation, sir. I understand there's much more to learn in the field." Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Foundation. Listen to that fancy talk. Boys," he called out to a group of nearby soldiers, "we got ourselves a foundation here." The soldiers shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether they should laugh along with their commanding officer. Most of them looked away, focusing intently on their equipment or finding sudden reasons to be elsewhere. "Sir, I'd like to get settled in and review my duties," Sarah said, maintaining her professional composure despite the obvious hostility. "Oh, you'll get your duties all right. But first, let me make something crystal clear." Morrison stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "I don't care what fancy school you went to, or what your daddy's connections are. Out here, you earn respect through blood, sweat, and years of service. You haven't earned anything yet." Sarah's jaw tightened slightly. Her father had nothing to do with her appointment to West Point or her assignment here. She had earned everything through her own merit, graduating in the top 10% of her class and excelling in every leadership exercise. But she knew better than to argue with a superior officer, especially on her first day. "I understand, sir. Do you? We'll see about that. Report to Sergeant Baker for your initial briefing." "And Martinez?" He paused for effect. "Don't expect any special treatment because you're a woman or because you went to West Point. If anything, I'll be watching you extra closely." Over the following weeks, Colonel Morrison made good on his promise. He seemed to appear everywhere Sarah went, always ready with criticism or additional tasks that served no clear purpose beyond making her life difficult. During morning formation, he would single her out for uniform inspections that went far beyond standard requirements. While other officers received routine assignments, Sarah found herself with the most challenging and often pointless duties. When she was assigned to oversee a convoy exercise, Morrison changed the parameters at the last minute, forcing her to reorganize everything with no additional preparation time. When she managed to pull it off successfully, he found fault with minor details that other officers would have overlooked. Martinez, your convoy was 12 minutes late arriving at Checkpoint Charlie, he announced during the debrief, his voice carrying across the room filled with other officers and senior enlisted personnel. Sir, we encountered an unexpected roadblock that required a detour. I made the decision to prioritize safety over speed, which added time but ensured all vehicles and personnel arrived without incident. Excuses. In combat, 12 minutes can mean the difference between life and death. Your job is to anticipate problems, not react to them. Captain Williams, another company commander, shifted in his seat. His own convoy exercises had faced similar delays without any public criticism. Several other officers exchanged glances, recognizing the unfair treatment but unwilling to speak up against a full colonel. The pattern continued relentlessly. During field training exercises, Morrison would assign Sarah to the most difficult sectors, often with inadequate equipment or personnel. When she requested additional resources, he would deny them, then criticize her performance when she struggled to meet impossible standards. One particularly hot afternoon during a desert training mission, Sarah's platoon was tasked with establishing a defensive position on rocky terrain with limited cover. While other units received standard engineering support, Sarah was told to make do with what you have. Her soldiers worked for hours in the blazing sun, using improvised methods to create effective defensive positions. Despite their exhaustion, they managed to establish a perimeter that met all tactical requirements. When Morrison arrived for inspection, he walked the line slowly, examining every detail. This position is adequate, he finally announced. But adequate isn't good enough when lives are on the line. A real enemy would have spotted the weaknesses in your northern approach within minutes. Sergeant Chen, Sarah's platoon sergeant and a veteran of 3 deployments, couldn't hide his frustration. Later, when they were alone, he approached her with obvious concern. Ma'am, with all due respect, that was some of the best defensive positioning I've seen, with limited resources. The colonel is being unfair, and the troops are starting to notice. Sarah appreciated the sergeant's support, but she also knew the delicate position he was in. Speaking against a colonel could end his career, and she wouldn't ask anyone to risk that for her sake. Sergeant Chen, our job is to meet the standards set by our superiors, regardless of personal feelings. Keep the troops focused on their duties, and let me worry about everything else. But privately, Sarah was beginning to feel the weight of the constant pressure. Every day brought new challenges that seemed designed more to break her spirit than to test her abilities. She found herself double-checking every detail, working longer hours than necessary, and constantly looking over her shoulder for the next criticism. The breaking point came during a live-fire exercise 3 months into her assignment. Sarah's company was conducting a complex movement under simulated enemy fire when Morrison appeared at the observation post, watching through binoculars with several visiting officers from division headquarters. Everything was proceeding according to plan when a communications error caused 2 units to lose coordination. Sarah immediately stepped in, adjusting the movement pattern and ensuring safety protocols remained in place. Her quick thinking prevented what could have been a dangerous situation, and the exercise concluded successfully. During the after-action review, Morrison stood before the assembled officers and senior enlisted personnel, his expression stern as always. The visiting officers from division sat in the front row, taking notes and observing the debriefing process. Today's exercise revealed several critical deficiencies. Morrison began, his eyes settling on Sarah. Lieutenant Martinez, your failure to maintain proper communications nearly resulted in a significant safety violation. Only luck prevented this from becoming a disaster. Sarah felt her heart sink. She knew the communications failure had originated from a technical malfunction, not from anything her unit had done wrong. More importantly, her quick response had actually prevented problems, not created them. Sir, the communications issue was equipment-related, and my response was to implement immediate corrective measures that maintained both tactical effectiveness and safety standards. Morrison's face reddened slightly. Are you questioning my assessment, Lieutenant? The room fell silent. Every officer present understood the gravity of the moment. Challenging a superior officer in front of witnesses, especially visiting officers, was career suicide. Sarah felt dozens of eyes on her, waiting to see how she would respond. "No, sir. I'm simply providing additional context, for the record. The only context that matters is results. And the result is that you failed to anticipate and prevent a communications breakdown that could have endangered your soldiers." One of the visiting officers, a general with silver hair and kind eyes, leaned forward slightly. Sarah noticed him make a note on his pad. But his expression remained neutral. After the meeting, Sarah walked alone across the base, her mind racing with frustration and doubt. She had joined the army to serve her country and lead soldiers, not to endure personal attacks that seemed to have nothing to do with actual performance. For the first time since arriving at Fort Harrison, she wondered if she had made a mistake. That evening, as she sat in her small quarters reviewing reports, there was a knock on her door. She opened it to find Sergeant Chen standing outside, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Ma'am, I hope you don't mind me coming by. I wanted to talk to you about today's exercise." Sarah stepped aside to let him in, curious about what had brought him there so late. "Sergeant, if this is about the colonel's comments, I understand the situation." "That's just it, ma'am. You don't understand the whole situation." Chen looked around nervously, then lowered his voice. "The troops are talking. They see what's happening, and they don't like it. You're a good officer, and everyone knows it except him." Sarah was touched by his loyalty, but concerned about where the conversation was heading. "Sergeant, I appreciate the support, but talking about superior officers isn't appropriate." "I know that, ma'am, but I also know something you might not. I've been at this base for 8 years, and I've seen how the colonel treats officers he doesn't like. You're not the first, but you might be the one who can finally do something about it." Chen explained that Morrison had a history of targeting officers who didn't fit his narrow vision of what a soldier should be. Female officers, minority officers, and anyone from prestigious military academies often found themselves subjected to the same treatment Sarah was experiencing. Most of them eventually request transfers or leave the service altogether. "That's what he wants, ma'am. He wants you gone." Sarah listened carefully, realizing that her experience was part of a larger pattern of behavior that had been going on for years. The knowledge didn't make her situation any easier, but it did give her perspective on what she was really fighting against. "What would you suggest I do, Sergeant?" Chen straightened up, his expression serious. "Keep being the officer you are, ma'am. Don't let him change you or drive you away. The Army needs officers like you, whether he likes it or not." As Chen left her quarters, Sarah sat down at her desk and opened her laptop. She began typing a detailed log of everything that had happened since her arrival at Fort Harrison. If Morrison wanted to play games, she would document every move. She was a West Point graduate, trained to think strategically and plan for the long term. What Colonel Morrison didn't realize was that by trying to break her spirit, he was actually forging it into something stronger. Every unfair criticism, every impossible task, and every public humiliation was teaching her valuable lessons about perseverance, leadership under pressure, and the importance of standing up for what was right. Sarah saved the document and closed her laptop, a new sense of determination settling over her. She had come to Fort Harrison to serve her country and lead soldiers. Colonel Morrison's bullying wouldn't change that mission. No matter how hard he tried to make her quit, she had no way of knowing that her careful documentation and unwavering professionalism would someday play a crucial role in events that would change both their careers forever. For now, she could only focus on being the best officer possible, regardless of the obstacles placed in her path. Outside her window, the desert base settled into its nighttime routine, with guards taking their positions and lights dimming across the compound. Sarah prepared for bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but feeling more prepared to face them than she had since arriving. The real test was just beginning. 2 years had passed since Sarah Martinez first set foot on Fort Harrison, and the desert base had become a proving ground that tested every aspect of her character and capabilities. Despite Colonel Morrison's continued campaign against her, Sarah had not only survived, but begun to thrive in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. The turning point came during a complex joint training exercise with allied forces from 3 different countries. Sarah, now a captain after her promotion 6 months earlier, was assigned to coordinate logistics for the entire operation. It was a massive undertaking that required managing supply lines, transportation, personnel movements, and communication systems across multiple time zones and languages. Morrison had specifically requested that Sarah be given this assignment. Knowing full well that previous officers had struggled with similar tasks, he expected her to fail spectacularly in front of international observers, which would provide the perfect excuse to recommend her for reassignment to a desk job somewhere far from combat units. Captain Williams, now a close friend despite their different backgrounds, had warned Sarah about the assignment's difficulty. "Sarah, this is a setup. Everyone knows it." The last officer who tried to handle a coordination job this size ended up having a nervous breakdown. Sarah looked up from the stack of planning documents covering her desk. Her small office had become a command center, filled with maps, charts, and communication equipment. "Maybe that's exactly why I need to succeed. Someone has to prove it can be done." The exercise, codenamed Desert Shield, involved moving 15,000 troops, hundreds of vehicles, and tons of equipment across simulated combat zones while maintaining realistic timelines and safety protocols. Sarah had spent weeks developing contingency plans for everything from sandstorms to equipment failures. On the morning the exercise began, Morrison appeared at the logistics command post with several high-ranking observers, including the same silver-haired general who had been present during Sarah's earlier public humiliation. The general, she had learned, was Major General Patricia Reynolds, the first woman to command a division in the Army, and someone whose reputation commanded respect throughout the military. "Captain Martinez," Morrison announced loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I hope you're prepared for today. Any mistakes in logistics coordination will reflect on the entire base, not just your career." Sarah stood at attention, her voice steady and professional. "Sir, all systems are ready, and contingency plans are in place for every identified scenario." Morrison's expression suggested he expected those contingency plans to be inadequate. "We'll see about that. General Reynolds will be observing your performance personally." What Morrison didn't realize was that Sarah had spent months building relationships with every key person involved in the exercise. She had learned the names and specialties of supply sergeants, transportation coordinators, communications technicians, and liaison officers from all participating units. More importantly, she had earned their respect through her thorough preparation and genuine concern for their welfare. When the first challenge arose 3 hours into the exercise, a major communication breakdown between American and German units, Sarah was ready. Instead of panicking or frantically calling for help, she calmly activated an alternative communication protocol she had established during pre-exercise planning. Within 15 minutes, all units were back in contact and proceeding with their missions. Sergeant Chen, now serving as her senior logistics coordinator, watched with admiration as Sarah managed crisis after crisis with calm professionalism. "Ma'am, I've never seen logistics run this smoothly during a major exercise." The real test came when a simulated enemy attack disrupted the primary supply route, just as critical ammunition and medical supplies needed to reach forward units. Traditional protocol would have required a 12-hour delay while new routes were established and secured. Sarah had anticipated this exact scenario. Working with Allied transportation officers, she had pre-positioned emergency supply caches at strategic locations and established alternative routes that could be activated immediately. What should have been a catastrophic delay became a minor inconvenience that was resolved in less than 2 hours. General Reynolds, who had been taking detailed notes throughout the day, approached Sarah during a brief lull in activity. "Captain Martinez, I'm curious about your alternative route planning. How did you know to position supplies at those specific coordinates?" Sarah straightened, aware that Morrison was listening to every word. "Ma'am, I studied satellite imagery and historical weather patterns for this region. cross-referenced them with tactical doctrine for enemy interdiction tactics, and identified the most likely disruption points. The supply positions were calculated to provide maximum coverage for probable scenarios. The general nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need more of. How long did that analysis take you? Approximately 40 hours, over 3 weeks, ma'am. Most of it done during off-duty time. Morrison stepped closer, his jaw tight with frustration. Captain, you should have cleared any unconventional planning through proper channels before implementing it. Before Sarah could respond, General Reynolds intervened. Colonel Morrison, I've reviewed Captain Martinez's planning documents. Everything was properly documented and submitted through appropriate channels. In fact, her contingency planning exceeds what I typically see from officers of much higher rank. The exercise continued for 3 more days, and each challenge only highlighted Sarah's exceptional preparation and leadership abilities. Supply lines functioned flawlessly. Communication systems remained operational despite equipment failures and weather problems, and participating units consistently met their objectives ahead of schedule. On the final day, during the closing ceremony attended by military officials from 4 countries, General Reynolds publicly commended the logistics coordination as a textbook example of modern military planning and execution. Morrison stood rigid during the praise, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. After the ceremony, several officers who had worked with Sarah during the exercise approached her with congratulations and requests to work together on future assignments. Among them was Colonel David Park, a West Point graduate 10 years her senior, who commanded one of the participating armored units. Captain Martinez, I want you to know that your logistics support made my unit's mission possible. I've never seen such thorough preparation combined with flexible execution. Have you considered applying for the Advanced Military Studies program? Sarah was honored by the suggestion. The Advanced Military Studies program was a highly competitive school that prepared selected officers for senior leadership positions. Graduates often went on to command major units and serve in crucial staff positions at the highest levels of military leadership. Thank you, sir. I hadn't considered that possibility. You should. The Army needs officers who can think strategically and execute flawlessly under pressure. I'd be happy to provide a recommendation letter. Over the following months, Sarah found herself receiving similar encouragement from other senior officers who had observed her performance. Word of her success during Desert Shield had spread throughout the military community, opening doors that had previously seemed impossible to reach. Morrison's reaction was predictable. Unable to criticize her professional performance directly, he intensified his personal campaign against her. He began questioning her presence at social functions, scrutinizing her personal relationships with other officers, and finding fault with administrative details that had nothing to do with her actual duties. During one particularly petty incident, Morrison called Sarah to his office to discuss what he termed inappropriate fraternization, because she had been seen having coffee with Captain Williams and 2 other officers in the base dining facility. Captain Martinez, military leadership requires maintaining proper distance from subordinates and peers. Your casual socializing undermines military discipline and creates the appearance of favoritism. Sarah maintained her composure despite the ridiculous nature of the accusation. Sir, I believe the regulations clearly distinguish between appropriate professional relationships and inappropriate fraternization. Having coffee with fellow officers in a public dining facility falls well within acceptable bounds. Don't quote regulations to me, Captain. I'm talking about the appearance of impropriety and the impact on unit cohesion. What Morrison didn't know was that Sarah had begun documenting every interaction with him, following Sergeant Chen's advice about protecting herself against false accusations. She had also quietly reached out to the base Equal Opportunity Office, not to file a formal complaint, but to understand her rights and options. The Equal Opportunity Advisor, Major Lisa Thompson, had been sympathetic but realistic about Sarah's situation. Captain, what you're describing sounds like a pattern of harassment, but proving it would be difficult without witnesses willing to come forward. Your documentation is smart, but be careful about how you handle this situation. Colonels have long memories and powerful connections. Sarah appreciated the advice, but had already decided on her approach. Rather than fighting Morrison directly, she would continue excelling in every assignment while building relationships throughout the military hierarchy. If he wanted to play politics, she would outmaneuver him through superior performance and professional networking. Her strategy began paying dividends when she received orders for a temporary assignment to the Pentagon, working on a joint task force analyzing logistics modernization for future military operations. The assignment was typically reserved for officers being groomed for rapid advancement, and it would give her exposure to senior leadership from all service branches. Morrison was required to sign off on the assignment, and Sarah watched him struggle with the decision during a tense meeting in his office. Refusing to approve it would require him to provide justification that he couldn't defend, but approving it meant sending away an officer he had been trying to discredit for years. "This assignment is above your experience level, Captain," he finally said. "You'd be working with senior officers who have decades more experience than you do." "I understand the challenges, sir. I'm confident that my background and recent performance demonstrate my readiness for this opportunity." Morrison signed the orders with obvious reluctance. "Don't embarrass this command, Martinez. Any failures reflect on all of us." 3 weeks later, Sarah found herself working in the Pentagon's Logistics Directorate, contributing to plans that would affect military operations worldwide. The work was intellectually demanding and required her to think beyond individual unit operations to strategic considerations affecting entire theaters of operation. Her Pentagon supervisor, Colonel Janet Morrison, no relation to Tank Morrison, quickly recognized Sarah's potential. "Captain, your analysis of the Desert Shield exercise has become a case study for logistics efficiency. We're incorporating several of your innovations into new doctrine that will be implemented service-wide." The 6-month assignment provided Sarah with insights into military planning at the highest levels and introduced her to officers who would shape the Army's future direction. She worked directly with generals and admirals, contributed to briefings for senior civilian leadership, and gained experience with strategic planning that few captains ever encountered. When she returned to Fort Harrison, Sarah brought with her commendations from 3 different general officers and recommendations for accelerated promotion. She also carried knowledge of upcoming organizational changes that would create new opportunities for officers with her background and expertise. Morrison greeted her return with a mixture of suspicion and barely disguised hostility. During her out-processing briefing at the Pentagon, he had received calls from multiple senior officers praising her performance. Rather than taking pride in an officer from his command achieving recognition, he seemed to view her success as a personal threat. "Captain Martinez, I trust your time in Washington didn't give you any inflated ideas about your importance. You're still a company-grade officer with limited experience." Sarah had changed during her Pentagon assignment. Working with senior leaders had given her perspective on Morrison's petty harassment and shown her that most military officers valued competence and professionalism above personal prejudices. She no longer felt intimidated by his attempts to diminish her achievements. "Sir, the assignment provided valuable experience that I'm eager to apply in future duties. I've learned much that could benefit this command." Morrison's expression suggested he had no interest in benefiting from anything Sarah had learned. "We'll see about that. Report to your company tomorrow morning. I trust you remember how to handle basic leadership responsibilities after spending 6 months in meetings." But Sarah's company had thrived during her absence, largely due to the strong foundations she had established before leaving. Her soldiers had continued performing at high levels, and several had received individual recognition for their achievements. The success only reinforced her reputation as an officer who could build lasting systems rather than simply managing day-to-day operations. Sergeant Chen, now promoted to Sergeant First Class, welcomed her back with obvious enthusiasm. "Ma'am, it's good to have you back. The company's been doing well, but we missed your leadership style." Sarah was pleased to learn that several of her soldiers had been selected for advanced training programs and that her company had received the highest ratings in multiple inspection categories. More importantly, morale remained high despite the challenges of military life and the demanding training schedule. As she settled back into company command, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her first day at Fort Harrison. She had evolved from a nervous young lieutenant trying to prove herself into a confident captain with a growing reputation for excellence. Morrison's harassment, rather than breaking her spirit, had forged her into a stronger leader who could handle pressure and criticism while maintaining focus on her mission. What she didn't yet realize was that her Pentagon assignment had caught the attention of senior leaders who were planning significant changes in military organization and doctrine. Her name was already being discussed for assignments that would accelerate her career progression in ways that Morrison couldn't imagine or prevent. The foundation for her eventual triumph was being laid, one successful assignment at a time. While Morrison continued fighting yesterday's battles with increasingly obsolete tactics, the real confrontation between them was still years away, but the stage was being set for a reckoning that would surprise everyone, including Sarah herself. 5 years had passed since Major Sarah Martinez had returned from the Pentagon, and the military landscape had shifted dramatically around Fort Harrison. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were winding down, but new challenges in cyber warfare and strategic competition with emerging powers demanded different approaches to military leadership and organization. Sarah's career had accelerated beyond anyone's expectations, including her own. After her successful company command, she had been selected for the Command and General Staff College, where she graduated with distinction and earned recognition as one of the top strategic thinkers in her class. From there, she had served as a battalion operations officer during a deployment to Eastern Europe, where her innovative approaches to logistics and coordination had earned her a Bronze Star and the attention of senior NATO commanders. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Martinez stood in the Pentagon office of Major General Patricia Reynolds, the same officer who had observed her breakthrough performance during the Desert Shield exercise years earlier. General Reynolds had become a mentor and sponsor, guiding Sarah through the complex politics of senior military leadership while ensuring she received assignments that developed her full potential. "Sarah, I have an offer that will change your career trajectory," General Reynolds said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from her desk. "How do you feel about returning to Fort Harrison?" Sarah was surprised by the suggestion. She had assumed her days at the desert base were behind her, especially given the continued presence of Colonel Morrison, who had somehow managed to avoid the normal rotation cycle that moved most officers to new assignments every few years. "Ma'am, I'm honored by any assignment you recommend, but I'm curious about the specific position." General Reynolds smiled, clearly enjoying the moment. "The Army is implementing a new command structure for training and doctrine development. Fort Harrison has been selected as the pilot location for an innovative program that combines traditional military training with advanced technological integration. We need a commanding officer who understands both classical military principles and modern strategic challenges." Sarah felt her pulse quicken as the implications became clear. "Ma'am, are you offering me command of Fort Harrison?" "Not just command, Sarah. You'll be promoted to full colonel and given authority to restructure the entire training program. This is a career-making assignment that puts you on track for general officer rank within the next 5 years." The magnitude of the opportunity was overwhelming. Command of a major installation at the rank of colonel was typically reserved for officers with 20 or more years of service. Sarah, at 32, would be one of the youngest installation commanders in the Army. "General, I'm deeply honored, but I have to ask about current personnel at the base. There might be some challenges with existing command relationships." General Reynolds leaned back in her chair, her expression knowing. "Are you referring to Colonel Morrison?" "Yes, we're aware of your history with him. In fact, his resistance to modernization and documented pattern of discriminatory behavior toward female and minority officers has become a significant concern for senior leadership." Sarah was surprised to learn that Morrison's behavior had finally attracted official attention. She had never filed formal complaints, choosing instead to focus on excellence in performance, but apparently, others had been less patient with his harassment. "Ma'am, I've always maintained professional relationships regardless of personal difficulties. That's exactly why you're the right choice for this assignment. Your ability to rise above petty conflicts while maintaining standards of excellence is what we need in senior leadership. Colonel Morrison will be reassigned to a staff position at the War College, where his experience can be utilized without direct command responsibilities. 3 months later, Sarah stood at the same spot where she had first arrived at Fort Harrison as a young lieutenant 8 years earlier. The desert landscape looked unchanged, but everything else was different. She now wore the silver eagle of a full colonel, and the soldiers unloading equipment were preparing for her change of command ceremony, not her introduction to base life. The ceremony was scheduled for the following morning, with representatives from major commands throughout the Army attending to witness the implementation of the new training program. What none of them knew was that Colonel Morrison's reassignment had been delayed due to administrative complications, meaning he would still be present when Sarah officially assumed command. The evening before the ceremony, Sarah walked through the base she was about to command, visiting familiar locations and reflecting on her journey. She stopped by the spot where Morrison had first confronted her, remembering the fear and uncertainty she had felt as a young officer unsure of her place in the military hierarchy. Sergeant First Class Chen, now the base's senior enlisted advisor, joined her during the walk. He had specifically requested to remain at Fort Harrison to serve under her command, seeing her promotion as validation of everything he had believed about her potential. "Ma'am, it's hard to believe we're back where it all started, but now you're in command. The troops are excited about the changes coming." Sarah appreciated his loyalty and perspective. Chen had watched her entire development as an officer and understood better than anyone what this moment represented. "Sergeant Major, I want you to know that everything we accomplish here will be built on the foundation of mutual respect and professional excellence. No one will be targeted or harassed because of their background, gender, or any other personal characteristic." Chen nodded firmly. "Ma'am, that's why the troops respect you. You've always treated everyone fairly while maintaining the highest standards." The change of command ceremony took place on the main parade field, with hundreds of soldiers in formation and distinguished visitors seated in reviewing stands. Major General Reynolds served as the presiding officer, while Sarah and the outgoing commander, Brigadier General James Patterson, stood at attention during the formal proceedings. As the ceremony progressed through its traditional elements, Sarah spotted Morrison standing with other senior officers near the reviewing stand. His expression was rigid, clearly struggling with the reality of watching someone he had tried to destroy assume command of the installation he had served at for nearly a decade. When the moment came for Sarah to assume command, General Reynolds spoke directly to the assembled formation about the significance of the new program and the exceptional qualifications of their new commander. She detailed Sarah's achievements without mentioning the challenges she had overcome, focusing instead on her innovations in logistics, strategic thinking, and leadership development. "Colonel Martinez represents the future of Army leadership," General Reynolds declared. "Her combination of tactical expertise, strategic vision, and commitment to excellence makes her uniquely qualified to lead this installation into a new era of military training and readiness." After the formal transfer of command authority, Sarah stepped forward to address her new command for the first time. Looking out at the sea of faces, she saw soldiers of every rank, background, and specialty, all united in their service to the nation. "Soldiers of Fort Harrison, it is my honor to assume command of this installation and responsibility for your welfare and professional development. Our mission is to prepare the Army's future leaders through training that combines time-tested military principles with innovative approaches to modern challenges." She paused, her eyes briefly meeting Morrison's glare from across the field. "We will accomplish this mission through mutual respect, professional excellence, and unwavering commitment to the values that define our service. Every soldier here, regardless of background or rank, will be treated with dignity and given opportunities to reach their full potential." After the ceremony concluded, traditional protocol required all senior officers to congratulate the new commander and pay their respects. Sarah stood receiving well-wishers and discussing future plans with visiting dignitaries, aware that Morrison was slowly making his way through the receiving line. When he finally approached, the moment that had been building for 8 years arrived with surprising quietness. Morrison stopped 3 feet in front of Sarah, his face a mask of controlled emotion, and slowly raised his right hand in a precise military salute. "Colonel Martinez," he said, his voice barely audible above the surrounding conversations. Sarah returned the salute with equal precision, holding eye contact with the man who had made her early career so difficult. "Colonel Morrison, thank you for your years of service to this installation." For a moment, time seemed suspended as both officers held their salutes. Around them, other conversations continued, but Sarah was intensely aware of the symbolism of the moment. The young lieutenant, who had once trembled under Morrison's criticism, now commanded the respect and salute of the officer who had tried to drive her from the service. Morrison lowered his salute first, his jaw tight with suppressed emotion. "Ma'am, I'll be departing for my new assignment next week. I've prepared transition documents for all ongoing projects. I appreciate your thoroughness, Colonel. Your experience and knowledge will be valuable assets at the War College." Morrison nodded stiffly, clearly struggling with words he couldn't speak in such a public setting. Whatever he might have wanted to say about their long conflict would remain unspoken, buried under the requirements of military courtesy and professional protocol. As he turned to walk away, Sarah felt an unexpected moment of sympathy for him. Morrison was a product of an older military culture that was evolving rapidly around him. His resistance to change and inability to adapt to new leadership paradigms had ultimately cost him the career advancement he had probably expected. Later that evening, after the official reception and countless congratulatory conversations, Sarah sat alone in her new office. The same office where Morrison had spent years planning ways to undermine her career. The irony was not lost on her as she reviewed plans for transforming Fort Harrison into a model of modern military leadership development. Her computer chimed with a new message, and she was surprised to see it was from Morrison's official email address. The message was brief and formal, but it carried unexpected weight. "Colonel Martinez, during the transition period, I reviewed your personnel file and performance records from your time at this installation. Your achievements speak for themselves, and I recognize that my initial assessment of your capabilities was incorrect. The Army is fortunate to have officers of your caliber in positions of leadership. Good luck with the new program. Respectfully, Colonel Richard Morrison." Sarah read the message twice, struck by its understated acknowledgement of years of conflict and misunderstanding. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was perhaps the closest thing to reconciliation that Morrison's pride would allow. She typed a brief response. "Colonel Morrison, thank you for your message and your service to this installation. I wish you success in your new assignment and appreciate your commitment to the Army's mission. Respectfully, Colonel Sarah Martinez." A week later, Morrison's departure from Fort Harrison attracted little attention beyond standard military protocols. There was no ceremony, no grand farewell, just the quiet transfer of an officer whose time at the installation had come to an end. Sarah watched his final departure from her office window, feeling a complex mixture of emotions about the conclusion of their long conflict. Under Sarah's command, Fort Harrison began implementing changes that revolutionized military training throughout the Army. Her innovative approaches to leadership development, combined with her commitment to equality and professional excellence, created a model that was eventually adopted at installations worldwide. The new training program attracted attention from military leaders around the globe, and Sarah found herself briefing foreign delegations, testifying before congressional committees, and contributing to strategic planning at the highest levels of government. Her reputation as a transformational leader opened doors to opportunities that would have been impossible to imagine during her difficult early years at the same base. 3 years into her command, Sarah received notification of her selection for promotion to Brigadier General, making her one of the youngest general officers in Army history. The promotion ceremony would take place at Fort Harrison, with her mentor General Reynolds presiding and representatives from throughout the military community attending. During the ceremony, as General Reynolds pinned the single star of a brigadier general onto Sarah's uniform, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. Every challenge, Every criticism and every moment of doubt had contributed to the leader she had become. General Martinez, Reynolds said during her remarks, "Your rise to general officer rank represents the best of what our military can achieve when we recognize and develop talent regardless of background or initial circumstances. You have shown that excellence and character will ultimately prevail over prejudice and small-mindedness." In the audience, Sergeant Major Chen watched with obvious pride as the young lieutenant he had believed in years earlier achieved recognition that validated all his predictions about her potential. Many of the soldiers from her early days at Fort Harrison had returned for the ceremony, creating a reunion that celebrated not just her promotion but the transformation of the entire installation. As she addressed the assembled formation as a newly promoted general, Sarah spoke about the importance of perseverance, the power of professional excellence, and the responsibility of leaders to create opportunities for others to succeed. Leadership is not about commanding respect through authority or intimidation, she said. True leadership means earning respect through competence, integrity, and genuine concern for those you serve with. It means creating an environment where every person can contribute their best efforts toward our shared mission. After the ceremony, as Sarah walked across the parade field where she had once stood trembling under Morrison's criticism, she realized that her journey from lieutenant to general had been about much more than personal advancement. She had helped transform an entire military culture, proving that leaders who valued diversity, encouraged innovation, and treated all soldiers with dignity could achieve extraordinary results. The base that had once been a place of fear and uncertainty had become a symbol of positive change in military leadership. Under her command, Fort Harrison had produced more successful officers, achieved higher training standards, and earned recognition as the most effective leadership development installation in the Army. Years later, when military historians wrote about the evolution of Army leadership in the early 21st century, they would point to Sarah's transformation of Fort Harrison as a turning point that demonstrated the power of inclusive leadership and professional excellence. Her story would be taught at military academies and leadership schools as an example of how individual character and determination could overcome institutional obstacles and create lasting positive change. But on that day, as she stood in her new office, wearing the star of a brigadier general, Sarah simply felt grateful for the opportunity to serve and lead in an institution that had ultimately recognized her value despite the obstacles she had faced. The young woman who had once feared Colonel Morrison's criticism had become a leader whose influence would shape the military for generations to come. The circle was complete, but her story was just beginning.